Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to Abstract Painting Mid-Century and Today, our third webinar, part of the Collectors Circle program sponsored by Christie's. My name is Kira Burge, and I'm the director of the Seattle Art Fair. Prior to working on the art fair, I worked at Greg Kucera Gallery here in Seattle, Ramsey Fairs, which produces art fairs internationally, and I owned a gallery and project space in South Seattle. I'm the current board president of Shunpike and hold studio degrees in fibers and textiles, as well as arts administration. Before I welcome Marisa, I'd like to thank Christie's Auction House for sponsoring this series of educational events, and of course AIG for being the presenting partner of Seattle Art Fair. With just an hour, this will be relatively high level, acting as sort of a jumping off point for further inquiry. As a reminder, there is a Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. If you click that, it will open up and you can ask a question at any time. We'll wait till the end to answer those questions. So let's see, without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Marisa Kayyem. Marisa is the Program Director of Continuing Education, New York for Christie's Auction House. She received her PhD from Columbia University in American Art History and the History of Photography. Marisa has taught at several institutions, including Rutgers and Columbia University, in addition to Christie's. So I think, Marisa, let's begin by grounding ourselves in kind of the beginning of abstract painting, right? What was those noteworthy moments during the mid-20th century in the United States specifically?
Yeah, I think we'll talk about the beginning of kind of abstract expressionism and this heyday of abstraction at mid-century in the United States. Abstract expressionism was an incredibly influential art movement based primarily in New York City after World War II. And what unites many of the artists is they had a shared interest in exploring new ways of creating art, in self-expression, and in exploring process and materials. And as you can see from the screen, abstraction at mid-century came in a variety of forms. You have the kind of drip paintings of Jackson Pollock, the kind of transcendent color field paintings of Mark Rothko, and a little younger generation, Frank Stella, that kind of hard-edged abstraction. I just love that photograph of Pollock because it so encapsulates this group of artists working at mid-century in New York. You see him as this kind of gruff, painter inside his painting, dripping house paints. He has this cigarette hanging out of his mouth. And that kind of characterization of Pollock as this kind of hard drinking, macho guy is associated with many of the artists who were working in abstraction at mid-century. It was definitely a boys' club of white men. But there were an incredible amount of innovative and incredible women artists and artists of color that were also working actually side by side with many of the abstract painters that you see on the screen right now. And they have traditionally been rendered somewhat invisible or marginalized during their careers. And also significantly, they've been marginalized historically as well.
So I'm curious, why does this happen? Why does this marginalization or this leaving out happen, Marisa?
Well, I think it's important to realize that artists of color, African-American artists and women were certainly marginalized from many aspects of mainstream culture during this time. But some of these artists like Norman Lewis, he was actually in the room when, the idea of abstract expressionism and calling it abstract expressionism really came to fruition. Lee Krasner, for example, until very recently, was really just best known as being the wife of Jackson Pollock. And what we see right now happening is, like in other aspects of our culture, a real reevaluation of art history and a real questioning by those working in the art world, our institutions, our collectors, our gallery dealers, our auction house, is what are the stories that are being told? Who are telling them? Who's been left out? And in some ways, how can we redress the lack of diversity that we've seen in our kind of summation of history of art?
And I think you point something out. I think there's this possibility, and what I've been observing and we'll talk through is really this rewriting of art history and what what those mechanisms have been. And that just reminds me of some of the work that SF MoMA was doing. Maybe we can go to the next slide.
Yeah, I think it's important to realize, who is writing art history? Why do some works of art get known and not others? The art world is a network. It's a network made of art fairs, artists, art dealers, museums, curators, and individuals. And it's, specialists at auction house. And it's all of these mechanisms, all of these participants that really write history for us, right? They're the ones that validate artwork and can rewrite that history as well. And I think this slide is great because one thing that we saw fairly recently was SF MoMA selling a Mark Rothko, really one of the big players of mid-century abstract expressionism. And the reason that they sold it was really to enable them to diversify their collection, to diversify it, not just with contemporary art like Mickalene Thomas, but also we see them looking back to this history of abstraction and pulling out an artist and collecting an artist named Alma Thomas, who started painting in the 1960s after being a retired teacher, had her first exhibition at the Whitney Museum of Art in 1972. She was represented by a woman art dealer, the Martha Jackson Gallery. And then after 1972, we see her kind of disappear from the art histories and the museum collections, not really being on view. So, when SF MoMA and other institutions are doing this, they're really trying to reinsert into their permanent collections, which is really important, the permanent collection, this kind of story of art that we've told. Yeah, this is another great example. I mean, the Museum of Modern Art in New York has really defined how we have narrated the story of art, especially modern art. And traditionally, for decades, actually, they would hang their Pablo Picasso Demoiselle d'Avignon, very important painting from 1907, next to other Picasso paintings and paintings by Georges Braque that were of their Cubist style, really telling a story of how the Demoiselle was a link to the development of Cubism. And just this last year, with the reopening of the Museum of Modern Art, they have shown Faith Ringgold, an African-American woman artist's 1962 painting of a race riot, especially in terms of the expressive figurative forms that we see in her 1962 painting, really creates a synergy with the Picasso painting and forces us to read that history differently. Likewise, to show a Matisse, and that is an Alma Thomas now, that has just been reinstalled into the Museum of Modern Art. Here is an African-American woman, abstract painter from mid-century, being juxtaposed with Matisse. And what we learn from this comparison is, Alma Thomas really extends Matisse's use of color as an expressive medium. And it makes us read that history in a very different way.
Yeah, I even in this kind of like small photo of it, I can tell that there is those color synchronicities there. I think these are all really great examples of how kind of the academy or the museums have really, taken this upon themselves to shift this, but to be honest, it feels a little slow. So I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on who you think really is advancing this, maybe with a little more aggression, for lack of a better word.
I mean, I think these things, as I said, it's a network and they work in conjunction with one another. I don't want to say that the museums are slow because all of the work and the exhibitions they're doing are really beneficial for all of us. But I do, and I know we share this interest in kind of collectors and tastemakers and how they really influence not just popular culture, but are really important in the rewriting of history. And I wanted to just start with the Obamas in the White House. I mean, what is fascinating is that in 2008, they hung an Alma Thomas, the first time an African American artist, female artist, was hung in the White House in their dining room. And this really sends a message. There's Alma Thomas next to not only important kind of historic works from the 19th century, but in a room with Robert Rauschenberg too. And the Obamas have been very influential, I think, in terms of their support of Black art history. Indeed, they, for their official portraits, as you may recall, they actually commissioned two contemporary artists, Amy Sherald and Kehinde Wiley. And, you know, that was all over Instagram and the media and the press. And that idea of creating a platform on which to kind of rewrite history is also something that Alicia Keys and Kasim Dean, who are, as many of you know, musicians, have also done with their Dean collection, which collects a variety, a diverse range of artists, but primarily focuses on modern and contemporary African American artists. And what's so interesting about them is that some collectors like to remain private, but they publicize everything they collect. They put the Dean collection on Instagram. They let people know what they're collecting. They share their stories about artists. They take risks. And what they do is create a platform for us to kind of reevaluate not just who are the contemporary artists working, but also the historical artists.
And that reminds me of two collectors that I think the Seattle Art Fair, or two collecting couples I think the Seattle Art Fair is really familiar with, and that have spoken last year and the previous year as part of our VIP program and our public talks. And that is Pamela Joyner and her husband, and then also locally Joseph Vaskovitz and Lisa Goodman, they're pictured here on the right with Hank Willis Thomas and a piece that they lent. So two things that are really interesting about both of these collectors is that their work as collectors is very mission driven. Pam is really articulate about, I mean, I even pulled a quote right there about she is in it to rewrite art history to include Black artists, and collects across the board and has a great book about that, and has put together some really incredible exhibitions. And then Joseph and Lisa are great friends, and I want to say colleagues as well in this arena. And they're just so actively lending and championing contemporary Black artists. It seems like collectors have so much influence in how we can view kind of the current state of things, and how we can also look back and rewrite and reevaluate to make it more holistic perspective. So I think that is a piece. And then when I really get into thinking about these two collectors, it parlays into the relationships that they have with the artists. And I wonder if you can speak a little bit to, to kind of some of those great relationships, or some of the roles that the artists have played that might be noteworthy that we should kind of call out. Celebrate.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is really true. I mean, collectors have this power just by collecting to tell stories, to tell history through their actual collections. And another great thing that collectors have is that they often have relationship with artists. But one thing I think we've seen in recent years that I think is just fascinating and actually quite amazing is that it's not just collectors supporting artists, but we're seeing artists support artists. There's a generation of younger and living artists who are experiencing success, both institutionally within museums and market-wise, who are turning a spotlight to those artists that were rendered invisible by history. and really pointing a lens to showcase so many artists that have been neglected. And I'm just showing one example of many that are happening right now. Mark Bradford, I mean, one could say one of the most important contemporary artists working today, really was influential in getting his art dealers, Hauser and Wirth Gallery, interested in Jack Whitten and Jack Whitten's work, because Jack Whitten had been such an influence on Mark Bradford.
That's fantastic. And I feel like that is the perfect time to welcome our artists that are going to be participating today. So I think I'm pleased to welcome local artists Jazz Brown, Sue Danielson, and Amanda Knowles. Each of these artists are represented currently by a gallery that has exhibited at the Seattle Art Fair, and they're currently participating in the Seattle Deconstructed Art Fair, which is an initiative that was put together by over 40 local galleries here in Seattle. So if you haven't had a chance to visit one of our local galleries, either in person safely with a mask and lots of distance, or online, please make sure you do so this week. Seattle Deconstructed Art Fair wraps up at the end of this month, which is only a few days away. So without further ado, Jazz Brown is a Seattle-based artist who uses acrylic paint to create vivid and expressive compositions. Exhibited extensively in Seattle at numerous galleries, including Coca, Martyr Sauce, Bridge Productions, and Joe Bar, among many others. Jazz is a self-taught artist and is represented by J. Rinehart Gallery. Marisa, do you want to take a stab at kicking us off?
I would love to, because I just love seeing Jazz's work in the background. And, you know, I was talking so much about kind of influence. And I was just wondering, you know, who are your either past or kind of contemporary influences in your work?
Thanks for first and foremost having me here. I'm grateful to be here. Inspirational wise, I think when we talk art, I like to divide inspiration into two segments in a sense, and they eventually come back together. But Frank Stella was a huge inspiration, you know, starting off, just a hard edge. If you look behind me, there's a lot of hard edge work. That's initially what I started on and kind of morphed into something a little more organic. Secondly, musicians really influenced the work. Jazz musicians in particular. John Coltrane, Miles Davis, Thelonious Monk, those guys really took me places. Alice Coltrane in particular.
Fantastic. I am very curious, Jazz, to ask you if you can just walk us through your process, and maybe in particular, but it doesn't have to be in particular, but this piece, Endless, Deathless, Eternal Neutrality, that everyone is seeing on their screen might be a great one to kind of jump as a jumping off point.
Certainly. Before I get to the process about the actual work, I'd like to kind of talk about the title. Each word, endless, deathless, eternal, neutrality, they're all implying the present moment, which is basically, you know, all there is. They're synonymous with the present moment. Not only that, the title is actually an acronym. So the four words, the first letter of each word is actually expressing Eden, just as, again, synonymous with the present moment. What I do as far as my process, I start off by painting each surface just black, just using black gesso, just to simulate whatever you want to call it, the void, the vacuum, the place where, you know, all things originate and ultimately return. What I do is I have these, I call them donuts, but they're essentially just circle templates that I use to create shapes. I just kind of fling one on the panel, and wherever it lands is where the first circle starts. And then from that, you know, I just add more and more. Each circle overlaps and creates new shapes. In those shapes, I'll start off with a tone, add a second tone, a second layer, and a third layer, and then finally finish it off with just a textured finish.
I love that spontaneity with your starting point.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's very musical in that too, very improvisational, which I think relates to the influence of music, which is incredible. I guess do we have one more, I think, maybe? Yeah, I mean, heaven and hell froze over. I loved also when you talked about that kind of juxtaposition between Frank Stella and that kind of hard edge shapes that are your influence, but also the music. And when we're looking at this work, we see the kind of hard edge geometry. But can you talk a little bit about that kind of opposition between the geometry and then are those painterly strokes or are they removals of layers? What is the texture and how do you achieve that?
The texture is pretty much done with a palette knife. So again, what I do is I start off with, just black gesso, do the donut templates. With this piece in particular, I actually erased a few shapes and created new shapes. Again, the same layer process. The texture more or less just gives it a more organic feel. So if you can just imagine the human body, you can say that the shapes are essentially a skeleton of sorts. I fill in with different colors, different organs, and then finally I finish it off with just a skin, a layer of skin.
I have one question that actually came in from the audience, which is, what's the scale? And I know you sent me the inches, but I didn't fit them all on. So maybe you can talk a little bit to the scale of your work and maybe even the breadth of what we're looking at, but maybe other work as well.
Sure, yeah, if you look behind me, you can see there are pieces ranging from 8 inches to 10 inches to probably a 30 by 40 inch behind me. The piece you're looking at right now, the Heaven and Hell Frozen Over, if I remember correctly, it's 24 by 30 inches. They can contact J. Rinehart Gallery, just to be sure, but I'm pretty sure it's 24 by 30 inches.
Fantastic. That's a great size. I feel like I've got a few pieces that are in that range and they fit in like any space, which is so nice.
Certainly.
So Jazz, I think we're gonna let you go on your way for a few minutes while we talk to Sue Danielson and Amanda Knowles, and then we'll bring you back and we'll discuss your work a little bit more as a group. Fantastic, thank you. So Sue Danielson is who I will welcome next. Sue Danielson is a Seattle painter, printmaker, and multimedia installation artist. She has exhibited at Bellevue Arts Museum, Whatcom County Museum of Art, and Trestle Gallery in New York. Her work is in the Microsoft Collection and both the King County and the City of Seattle Public Art Collections. In addition to her artistic practice, Sue is the co-founder and co-director of the Duwamish River Artist Residency, and she is represented by Linda Hodges Gallery here in Seattle. So Sue, welcome.
Thank you, I'm excited to be here.
Fantastic. So I wanted to ask about your work and its influence with the river, specifically kind of hearing that little footnote about that you co-founded the Duwamish River Artist Residency and looking at this piece in particular that feels so water to me. So can you go into that and talk about kind of your relationship with the Duwamish River and in the context of your work?
Yeah, the Duwamish Artist River Residency that I co-founded in 2011 with Fiona McGuigan. And it's really a residency about being a Seattle, it was a redefining of residency in that we don't go stay on the river overnight, but we go down there for 8 consecutive days every year. And we've been doing that. This is the 9th year. And although we don't officially have a residency because of COVID, we're still doing a few gatherings. The artists who can get out of the house and feel comfortable doing that, we've gathered to do some drawing sessions this year, a little bit more around the city. But the key part of the residency for me individually has, that landscape. The Duwamish River is the only river in Seattle, and so it's our hometown river. It's the industrial heartland of Seattle, and yet it has some restoration projects. There are small but beautiful green belts there, and we often go exploring on foot all around, not only in the green belts, but in that industrial environment. And it's overwhelming. There's a cacophony there of the industry going on, the trucks going by, there's trains, and yet you can sit on the river and the sound of the birds will overpower that. But for me, it was very difficult to break down that very overwhelming environment. And the water was key in part for me to delve into that environment. One of the other things I had to do was literally turn and look at a bush, because somehow a bush seemed less complex than that landscape, which is really not true. But much of my work is layers and layers of line and paint and collage that I build up, and that also reflects that intensity of that space.
I was going to actually ask you about your process and the idea of layering, because it's just so prevalent in this work. And then in the other work that I think we have next, yeah, Pinky Perfect, because I love the title of Pinky Perfect too. Isn't pink always perfect?
It is, it is.
But what was so interesting to me is in the collaged elements, are these found objects? What are the objects that you're using in the collage?
Well, going back to my process as well, a lot of my process is observational, and it's about walking through the landscape. And I get a lot of information in the landscape. So part of that's picking up shapes. I take it, well, not literally, but from memory. And it might be, you know, the space between the branches on a tree, or it might be a shape that I see. Sometimes I'll come across the burnout tree, and it'll create a really interesting shape. And so I bring those memories back into my studio, and I do a lot of mark making on papers to build up lots of papers to cut out shapes and then have them laying around, so that when I'm building a painting, I just have this pile of shapes I can shuffle through. So the process is a little bit like building a puzzle, or sometimes I think about it as because my process is so process driven. I'm just making a mark and then responding to that, and I'm moving through the building of a painting almost like walking through a forest or an industrial landscape like the Duwamish River Valley.
Oh, I love that. So this next piece really struck me because, so Wild at Heart, it feels really different than the other two, even though I see a lot of similarities in the shapes and some of the textures. But it feels more energetic and vibrant. And I would love for you to, yeah, speak to that and kind of dive into that. And yeah.
Well, you know, I thought about this, we talked about this yesterday, and I thought about it a little bit more. And really, what occurred to me is last year, a lot of my practice involved learning and developing video content for my installations. And I had an installation in the fall. And so really, and I think I just needed a break from painting. That was part of that. And so, after the installation, actually literally almost the next day, I got on it. I had to take a plane because I couldn't drive to Wyoming. The time was so short. And I went to Brush Creek Foundation residency in Wyoming, which is, I'm in love with Wyoming. That's a whole nother landscape to walk through. And I focused on the video, but I did a lot of drawing and collages and making collage paper while I was there. And then I came back to my studio and I was still making collage paper. I still wasn't painting. And this painting really represents picking up a paintbrush and getting back to painting, which is my true love. And so I think it was just coming home to painting and saying, oh, I still love this. This is what I love to do.
I love that. Well, on that note, I think you will disappear magically, and then we will welcome you back in a few minutes after we talk with Amanda.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. So Amanda Knowles is a Seattle-based artist as well. If you haven't figured it out, there's a theme here. She holds an MA and an MFA in printmaking from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Her work has been exhibited internationally and garnered wide acclaim, including awards from Pollock Krasner Foundation, Artist Trust, and most recently, Amanda was the finalist for the Nettie. Amanda is represented by G. Gibson Projects that has a pop-up exhibition at Foster White Gallery as part of the Seattle Deconstructed Art Fair right now. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's such an honor to have been invited to participate with my stellar colleagues. Seattle has a really strong art community and a really good group of artists and lots of abstractions. So thanks.
Well, it's funny because I am not from Seattle. I love seeing all of your work. But, you know, as an outsider to Seattle, do all artists do the Duwamish River? Because I'm noticing a kind of similarity between you and Sue, just at least in terms of title. And I think it's interesting because obviously it's a very important tributary in Seattle. But your approaches and your work, and I'm sure your process are so different. Could you talk a little bit about the role that Duwamish plays in your art and a little bit about your process?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for the question. Yeah, I'm part of the Duwamish residency as well. About 3 years ago, I'm not a lifelong Duwamish residencier, but about 3 years ago, I started with them, and it really was a fantastic time for me because, you know, I have this lifelong interest in industry, both in its in all of its guises, sort of in its and implications that it has. So, you know, growing up in commuting by train on the East Coast, grain silos in Madison, all of these things are part of it. Construction, the absolute, and you have not been to Seattle potentially, but recently, but we have a lot of construction going on. The city is really booming, especially with the building of light rail, so all of that. But the participation in the Duwamish residency allows me sort of to sit with the river, this industrial river. It's also, you know, as Sue said, it's landscape, it's all of these other things as well. But for me, what I'm looking to is that industry. And the way I sort of get into that is by taking photos. I take photos with my iPhone as well as with double and triple exposed photos from a Holga camera. So just really cheap plastic camera. And I use this as a sketchbook to sort of gather imagery.
Fantastic. So now my brain is kind of like turning with like the photo piece and the, you know, the cut paper. It's interesting too. There are some through lines between Jazz's work and Sue's and your work. And I'm looking at this one specifically, and I'm very curious about how you landed on paper and also thoughts around composition as well, and how you think through that.
Yeah, great, thank you. I was educated as a printmaker, so paper. I mean, that's what we do. So it's a beginning. I don't mean it's the end to everything, but it is a place that printmakers start. And I really enjoy paper because it is, you know, very easy to cut and manipulate and reconfigure paper. And I do that quite a bit. I may start with a regular size 22 by 30 piece of paper and then cut it down and build it up and all of those things. I start with sort of intuitive marks and then begin building imagery in a more, you know, I reference the industrial, all of those photos that I take, but it is sort of digested through me. And I take what I kind of want from those. So, and it's this building up, and actually kind of interesting building up of walls, you know, as it goes. So, yeah. And I just sort of start to look at each piece and see what it needs in terms of color and value and line and texture and all of those things, and really have a one-on-one conversation with it.
I love that. And this piece, I noticed it's a diptych, right? Am I
Yeah.
seeing that right? That line is not a break in my screen or my pixels.
No, that is true. And my favorite portion of this is that little awkward section where things don't actually line up the way that you want them to. And I love that awkwardness and that vulnerability.
Fantastic. And I think we have one more image that we wanted to chat with you about.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting also looking at the last work called City View, but then this one's called False Work. And, you know, it's just a very interesting title. And I was wondering what the role titles play in your work, but also how does that title relate to this work and what does it mean to you?
Yeah, well, most artists, well, there are a lot of different ways of going about this where people start with the title. I spend a lot of time afterwards with the title, like, oh no, you don't fit. Oh, like that sort of thing. With this one, this actually came from a lecture by Laurie Talcott, who does beautiful work sort of about the alchemical and magical properties of objects. But she gave an artist talk that that had a little section on false work. And when I learned about it, I was just like, yes, it's everything. So false work is a construction term, and it is a temporary structure that is used to support a permanent structure until it can actually hold itself up. And so I just love, so scaffolding and that sort of thing is false work. I just love the poetics of that idea that we're all being held up by something, or, you know, what is holding up what, and you know, is this all false work for the work? Is it, you know, could it all be false work for our lives? What are the little pieces, and how can you kind of break them down? So quite lovely.
Very much so.
That's lovely. Well, I think let's bring everyone back and switch into Q&A. And if you have questions, please add them into that Q&A. Use that Q&A little icon. And there's been a few that have come in already. So I will kick us off with a really interesting question, which is, what do you hope the viewer takes away or thinks about when they look at your work? And maybe we'll start with Jazz, if you're ready.
Sure, yeah. First and foremost, work deals with present. So just the notion or the understanding that the present moment is all that we have, is all that, you know, we are essentially. Everything, every object found in the moment, whether it's the human body, whether it's a tree, whether it's a car, you know, it's all connected in one way or another. There is a source, you know, that it came from, and there's a source that it will return to, and that source is simply the now.
Ooh, I like that. Sue, what are your thoughts about that? What do you hope the viewer is taking away?
I guess I'm hoping that they take away a sense of vitality and perhaps a sense of calm and curiosity, maybe, and introspection. I tend to think of my paintings as visual diaries of moving through life, and I consider them primarily landscapes. So I hope that those qualities come through.
And Amanda?
I think that I hope people look to different things to pay attention to, I guess. Sort of the that, you know, what people deem as beautiful or worthy of attention might not be all that there is, and so just sort of giving new life to other things.
Nice. So a few more pop-ups. I know I prompted Jazz when we were doing kind of like our 2-on-1, but everyone else is asking Sue for the scale of your work, and also Amanda, but maybe Sue, you want to give us a sense of the scale of your work. Although I have this feeling it varies quite a bit.
It does vary quite a bit. In the last few years, I haven't made anything what I would consider large, although I have in the past. So Wild at Heart, if I recall right, and again, as Jazz mentioned, like you can contact Linda Hodges Gallery for more details. I believe Wild at Heart is 30 by 40, and Pinkly Perfect is 16 by 20. And I believe the water piece, which name I can't remember right now, is probably 24 by 18.
And Amanda, you want to give everyone a sense of scale?
Yeah, I work probably 11 by 15, which is a quarter sheet of printmaking paper. Behind me there is a piece that is 6 foot by 4 foot, and I generally don't work that big, so maybe in the I do like to put things together, so maybe 40 by 60 is sort of another size that I work with.
Nice. I'm sure that is helpful. Everyone's now go measure your walls. And so a great question came in about the market, and I think I'd love for Marisa, I'd love for you to kind of frame it up a little bit, and then maybe Sue can hop in and we can kind of tag team it and pass the baton to each other. But the question that came up is really about how much the market kind of influences this history making and also your own work, kind of thinking about it from a lot of different perspectives. And it's something we very lightly maybe hinted at during the first kind of 15-20 minutes of the webinar. But Marisa, I think that there are some indicators. I know you and I have discussed this offline, of how the market has played a role, specifically auction houses, in helping to rewrite art history. And then maybe we'll bring it into today as the title goes, and we can reframe that.
I think when we talk about the market, we're also talking about that network that I talked about, because none of those individuals or institutions function in isolation. So for example, collectors buy work at auction or from art dealers, but collectors are also on the boards of museums and donate works of art to museums. So all of these things are kind of interrelated. When we talk about prices and record-breaking prices, these are another type of platform that allows for a certain kind of recognition. And it is a symbolic thing when, Carrie James Marshall, who, just several years ago's work was only selling for $100,000 to $300,000, all of a sudden, African-American artist representing African-Americans sells for $21 million. And again, that really affects the way the culture sees these things. But it's also important to realize that the financial value and the price paid for works of art is only one kind of validation. And that validation is very much linked to critics and curators and institutions and art dealers and collectors.
So reframing, thank you. I think that helps us kind of grapple with all those influences and how that can drive and kind of move the market. So thinking about your galleries, I guess, and thinking about your own studio practice, is that something that you, maybe we'll start with Sue, that you connect those dots to, or is that something that you kind of keep separate?
I tend to keep it separate. When I'm in my work, in my studio working, I really have to focus from a place within me and keep that external world completely separate. I feel like if I let that world come into my studio, it impacts the quality of my work. And I just have to make the best work that I can make, and the chips fall where they may.
Jazz, how do you think about the market at all, or are you just in the zone?
Not at all. I guess, the market, I get, what it represents, and, the ups and downs, all this stuff. But for me, the praise and the criticism, I don't want anything to do with it. Whatever that, means for the painting, that's separate from the work itself. For me, I'm going to paint regardless. I woke up this morning, 10 o'clock, and just, started working on a piece, that I've been working on since yesterday. Whether, 10 years from now that painting sells for $10 million, it's out of my hands.
Amanda, how do you approach that?
It's just between me and the pieces most of the time. So it's, I don't really get involved in the other portion of it. I mean, of course, we all want to make a living. And especially, I know that a lot of people are hurting nowadays, especially artists in this culture, as people are not going out as much and that sort of thing. But yeah, no, it's between me and the work.
Wonderful. Okay, I'm sorting, so give me a second. There's a lot of great questions coming in. I think kind of building off, Amanda, what you just said and kind of mentioned that, the pandemic, it's here, we're present, like we're all living in the same world together. Has that shifted your practice at all, or how you approach it, or how much time you spend? How is that changing or not changing things for you, Amanda?
Well, I'll start. I teach, and so I had to do this whole shift of teaching online, learning to teach online, all of that stuff. So in just most recently, I have not been actually present in my studio, just sort of trying to get my head around how to get students to do their best work. And actually I've found a really interesting thing through having them experiment. So, which is terrifying for me, because it's like, okay, do whatever you want, go. But I am in a kind of place of experimentation at the moment. You'll see a bunch of experimentation behind me. And, I go through that cyclically anyway. I just had a show last year. And so I'm just sort of working through what's going to come next. So thank you.
Yeah. Jazz, are you feeling affected, unaffected? I mean, does it influence kind of your thought process or your inspiration at all?
Honestly, for me, I guess it, kind of did the opposite of, clearly there was no intention for, COVID-19, but for me, it just ramped up the creative process. I had a choice. I could, either just, be dormant or, create more work. And I think for the most part, just the, even, using words like isolation, like that didn't really, make sense to me. I saw it more, apocalyptic, but in a, in a way that expresses, there's going to be a shift, we're out with the old and with the new. So the work definitely reflected that.
Yeah, I've been hearing a lot of kind of in the gallery and venue space, a lot of reimagining. And I'm like, that's the word I want to hold on to more, is this is an opportunity to kind of look inward and outward. Certainly. In a different way. Sue, how is it affecting your practice?
Well, it initially somewhat surprisingly shifted my palette a bit. And so these pieces, especially this one and the one right behind my head, are some of the pieces that I started making at the start of COVID. I found, interestingly enough, my paintings became brighter and lighter as this whole thing was coming down on all of us, and refined this palette now that I'm working almost exclusively with, and lots of pink. Pink is good, and I think that I think often paintings for me are, and for many artists, are a reflection of what's going on in our unconscious, and it as difficult as COVID has been for so many people, I've been somewhat lucky in not having to worry about an income because someone in my family is working. So that kind of impact hasn't been as devastating. But still, it's been a very difficult time. And yet when I look at these paintings, it's almost like a beacon for me that, there, somewhere inside of me, there is a future that we're moving towards that we can't see. And I just have to work and trust that to propel me forward. And we all have a lot of work to do to get us there. And, just keep doing the work.
Marisa, you made a really, and kind of on this note, because I've been thinking a lot about my own work, and I imagine you are as we're in Zoom land these days. But you made a really interesting observation yesterday when we wrapped up rehearsal, which was the being able to connect, even if it's virtually, and hear from artists. Kind of, is this invigorating? Do you want to expand on that and talk about how you're navigating this, and personally and professionally, whatever you're comfortable with?
I mean, I would agree that people have been so creative in terms of ways to keep connected and for artists to engage with the public in ways that they traditionally haven't. And believe me, I think all of that is important. And for me, those experiences, those virtual experiences, for me, don't equate quite as importantly with in-person experiences, but I still greatly appreciate them. And what I noticed yesterday, I mean, it was funny. I just was so grateful to be a part of this because I felt almost moved to tears because I really hadn't done a studio visit. And we really did a few studio visits today. And it had been a long time since I'd been in dialogue, seeing artists work, talking about their process. And even as a person who's just a lover of art, what you all were saying, especially you, Sue, about creating, giving you hope, your guys creating gives me hope too. So, that's what
Oh, I love that. I'm like, oh. My Q&A box disappeared momentarily. I think we have time for maybe one more question. I'm gonna, maybe two. So one that I know is always great is, what are the resources that, and raise your hand if you want to chime in first, if you have thoughts about this, but really, what are the resources we as panelists could recommend to our audience to learn more about art history or engage with abstract art, or just art in general? Like, what are you listening to, and what can we point people towards? Amanda.
Sorry, I just do a lot of reading and a lot of all of that. So a lot of what I read has nothing to do with this, but I'm reading Mary Gabriel's 9th Street Women right now, which is about the women of the abstract expressionist movement, and it's a beautiful book. Also, a little plug for the Duwamish. It's a Duwamish book by B.J. Cummins about the history of the river and the cleanup and all of the different parts to it.
And the social history as well.
Social history, yeah.
Very much about the people and the Duwamish tribe, which of course is where it all started. And it's a beautiful book, yeah.
And the land we're on.
Sorry, I plugged that, but
no,
there you go.
Don't. This is plug time.
I like the Duwamish theme.
One that comes to mind for me is that with the change in the governor's order in the state of Washington around museums, we are going to be able to masked and socially distance if we're comfortable, go to our local museums again. And I think Seattle Art Museum has announced that they'll have like a members preview, and then they'll have, or a members period of time, and then it will open up, I think, I want to say it's September 11th, but I know it's on their website. And I'm looking forward to going in safely to actually revisit Bagley and Virginia Wright's collection, which really, I mean, I think some of the images early on we pulled from Sam's website, and that is rooted in abstract expressionism and goes all the way to today. It's pretty extensive and such a gift, and I feel like I haven't, it's been up for many years, but I haven't seen it in so long. And so I'm looking forward to kind of rediscovering that. And another thing is Pam Joyner and her husband, they have a book out that's called 4 Generations, the Joyner, and I'm going to mess his name up because I think it's Italian, Giuffrida collection of abstract art that was published by Gregory R. Miller and Company. And that is the breadth of their collection, and it's all Black artists, abstract, it's sculpture, it's painting, it's like everything in between, and they're just lovely, and that is something to put on your bookshelf for sure, and to comb through. What other resources?
Well, speaking of museums, I mean, I think one thing in terms of what I was talking about earlier, there have been some really good museum exhibitions in the last couple of years. There was the Denver Art Museum, the Women of Abstract Expressionism at the Tate Galleries, and then it toured the United States with Soul of a Nation, which I think is a really important exhibition. And then at the Brooklyn Museum, there was We Wanted a Revolution, Black Radical Women from 1965 to 1985. So, I mean, you know, there's other more academic books, and certainly abstraction at mid-century has been written about quite a bit. But in terms of the idea of rewriting this history, I think those were great museum exhibitions. And of course, everyone always likes to look at pictures when they're reading, with great illustrations of the artwork.
Fantastic. Well, that puts us at time, and I'm just like eager. It's went by really fast, as I promised. But I think that we are now all very much looking forward to the next show and artist talks that Amanda and Jazz and Sue will have. And Marisa, thank you so much for helping us frame all of this up. This was really a delight and should really just be a jumping off point and a starting point for all of our continued discovery.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. It was so nice to be here.
Thank you.
It was nice to meet you.